Hey, do you want some candy?
Did you make sure Sydney got her meal? I was the recent addition to the staff at the nursing home. Initial impressions weren't favorable. I had caught one of the certified nursing assistants attempting to lift a resident alone. There were visible bruises on the resident's arms, indicating it wasn't an isolated incident. I reported the incident, and as a consequence, the certified nursing assistant was terminated. Surprisingly, he was a favorite among the staff. While it wasn't personal to me, the others took it personally. They were determined to make me pay for what I'd done to their friend. 3 days later, I was assigned to feed Sydney. Her room occupied the end of the east hall, consistently bathed in subdued light from a lamp in the corner. A nurse mentioned that Sydney had a sensitivity to sunlight and overhead fluorescent lighting, although she didn't specify the nature of the reaction. Sydney was essentially catatonic, the kind of resident who needed basic feeding and watering. She struggled with swallowing and required a thickening additive even in her water to prevent choking. I received a bowl filled with some form of mush and a cup of water with a consistency similar to her food. I hadn't met Sydney before. Her door was always closed. I knocked, not because she would be aware of my presence, but out of habit. Other than the unique lighting, her room mirrored the others in the facility. Sydney was a petite elderly woman. She was propped up, fixated on an episode of The Price is Right, her eyes devoid of any vitality. Her eyes, the dominant feature on a face with an upturned nose and a wide, thin mouth, resembled dried worms stacked on top of each other, exhibiting large raw splits along their lengths. They shimmered in the television light, and I was instructed to apply some lip balm once I finished feeding her. Thin gray strands of hair barely clung to her bony shoulders. Her eyes, even from a distance, resembled fish eyes, and they lingered in my thoughts. Closing the door as instructed, I sat beside her, placing the food on the side table and introducing myself. I believe that even the most unresponsive residents deserve the courtesy of an introduction. What if they were still aware? I shared a bit about myself, scanning the room devoid of personal items. No pictures, no drawings from grandchildren, no cards. Pulling open the nightstand drawer, I found a Bible and a strip of heavy, black cloth. Before feeding her, I gave her a drink. As the straw touched her lips, they curled around it, and she began to suck. Everything about her seemed lifeless, except those lips. I initially intended to give her a sip, but she quickly consumed the entire cup. Her eyes, unfocused, remained fixed on the television. Setting the cup down, I picked up the bowl. Placing a half-spoonful of mush at her lips, they moved voraciously, exhibiting an unexpected vitality. There was an unsettling energy in those greasy, cracked lips, set in a face frozen in stillness, akin to a predator lying in wait at the bottom of the ocean. Attempting to shake off the thought, I looked down to scoop more mush. When I glanced back up, Sydney was staring at me. It startled me. Although her body and face hadn't budged, her large glassy eyes were on me, tracking my every move. It took a moment to regain composure, but her gaze persisted. I continued feeding her. Her eyes held life, yet they emanated coldness. It was an indescribable sensation. After finishing, I wiped off her mouth. She observed me the entire time. Applying lip balm made her lips squirm under my touch. Despite wearing gloves, the sensation left me uneasy. That night, restless, I experienced nightmares, but upon waking, I couldn't recall them. The following day, my supervisor assigned me to feed Sydney again, smirking as she informed me. It mirrored the previous day. She remained immobile until I began feeding her. Her eyes continued their scrutiny. Her lips continued to quiver. Waking up the next morning, I was entangled in sweat-soaked sheets, feeling tempted to call in sick due to exhaustion. Entering Sydney's room later that day, something was different. Her eyes followed me before I even started feeding her, and I tried my best to avoid meeting their gaze. That's when I noticed something else. Her upturned nose flared as if catching a scent of my presence. I inquired with several other certified nursing assistants about their experiences with Sydney. Their response was laughter, dismissal, and even suggestions to quit. One person only responded with an eye roll and a muttered bitch as she walked away. Knowing I needed a new job, I struggled to find leads while feeling constantly unwell. Oddly, the thought of returning to work triggered anxiety, despite feeling better on my days off. The nightmares persisted, yet remained elusive in memory. As I fed Sydney, it felt like I was a co-pilot in my own brain. I entered her room, witnessing her nostrils flare and those eyes fixated on me. A rash appeared on my left hand, diagnosed as palmoplantar pustulosis. Quitting smoking and medication proved ineffective as it worsened, spreading up my forearm. Despite feeling increasingly unwell, I continued to feed Sydney. Sometimes I found myself in her room when I should be elsewhere. During a day off, feverish and restless, an irresistible urge led me back to the nursing home. Almost at Sydney's feeding time, I entered covertly through the back door. Her door was open, and Robbie, a new staff member, was feeding her. Intrigued, I questioned him about the black cloth wrapped around Sydney's head. He explained it was a blindfold to trigger her condition, although he didn't understand it fully. Sydney, even blindfolded, sensed my presence, her nostrils flaring. "I just came to get something from my locker. Are you sick, Emily? You look awful," Robbie remarked. The next workday, despite my exhaustion, I remained alert. Itching and feverish, I resisted entering Sydney's room until feeding time, devising a plan. Avoiding eye contact, I placed the bowl and cup on the floor, grabbed the Bible, and positioned my phone to film the feeding. I felt a sense of detachment. Upon reviewing the video, my gaze was fixed on Sydney while I fed her. My eyes appeared lifeless, movements robotic. After finishing, I stood over her and removed the glove from my left hand. In a trance, I extended my finger toward her lips, and they eagerly enveloped it. The video depicted her gradually pulling my hand down her throat bulging, lips puckering. In the video, I mechanically cleaned my hand and replaced the glove. Sydney's eyes never wavered. The video continued. I retrieved the bowl and cup, then left the room. Sydney's unwavering gaze haunted me. After a few moments, I returned to the room, grabbed my phone, and haven't gone back since. Despite the fading impact, I still feel her presence in my head, beckoning me back to the nursing home.